Here we are again at the Partnership and Participatory Engagement session of the Ideas Synthesis. Remind you to check out hashtag Asteroid Partners and join and follow the conversation online. We've had some really good conversation started already. We're about to move into our third and final section of this conversation before we then open it up into wide-ranging discussion. And so with that, let me turn it over to David Gustin, who's going to be representing ECAST, and the expert in citizen assessment of science and technology. David.
Good morning. My name is Dave Gustin, and I'm here in Tempe at Arizona State University, where I co-direct a research center called the Consortium for Science Policy and Outcomes, or CSPO. In my remarks, as was mentioned, I'm representing a group called ECAST, the Expert in Citizen Assessment of Science and Technology Network. ECAST is a distributed network that brings together university-based research centers like CSPO, informal science education centers like the Museum of Science Boston, citizen science programs like Science Cheerleader and SciStarter, and nonpartisan policy think tanks like the Woodrow Wilson International Center. Together, we engage citizens on decision-making related to science and technology policy. ECAST organizes deliberations among citizens to inform them about S&T policy, elicit their input, to reciprocally inform S&T policymakers. ECAST's methods are designed to enable participants to formulate and articulate their own questions so that policymakers may better understand and take into account public values around S&T. The grand challenge of the Asteroid Initiative addresses is find all asteroid threats to human populations and know what to do about them. Part of that challenge is also communication, to engage in broader conversation with those who are not thinking of or not working on or not caring about such an initiative. Despite the clear articulation of the grand challenge, there are values inherent in the question that are not completely owned by the current community of interest, including advancing human space exploration, expanding planetary defense, anticipating spillover effects of technologies, and charting the nation's future role in space. Thus, statements like that in the August 17th Washington Post: rarely has the agency proposed an idea so controversial among lawmakers, so fraught with technical and scientific uncertainties, and so hard to explain to ordinary people, that suggests that a wide frame and a long-duration public engagement process is crucial. We think of this as taking into account what we call the life cycle of decision makers, in which we consider a variety of roles that citizens perform in, as well as a variety of decision makers and points of decision within society, not just the official, high-ranking, and technical ones. The grandest challenge is therefore to draw otherwise unengaged citizens into respectful, multi-directional conversations about the Asteroid Initiative and enable them to learn about and make recommendations based on their own questions and interests. Aspiring to this more active, engaged role for citizens, rather than just have them be passive understanders of science, is part of a broader approach that we call anticipatory governance, which involves, in addition to public engagement, open-ended approaches to foresight, for example, using scenarios rather than predictive modeling, and thinking about plausibility other than just risk, and integrating knowledge and approaches across disciplines, for example, by encouraging collaborations between natural scientists and engineers on one hand, with social scientists and humanists on the other. Taking these aspects ensemble and allow for the reflexive governance or management of a new science and technology in an informed and socially robust fashion. A plan of action for increased public understanding of and engagement with the Asteroid Initiative could include soliciting informed, structured feedback from citizens in multiple geographic regions, creating long-term feedback opportunities for the long-duration Asteroid Initiative, and providing an on-ramp for citizens to learn by doing through other related and ongoing activities. This shift from public understanding to public engagement has already been happening in the Science Museum and Science Center community, and it has involved concomitant shifts from public comment to citizen deliberation, facilitated not only by a change in attitude and a change in understanding, but of course also by a change in technologies. ECAST's experience in this matter includes coordinating the U.S. component of the recent worldwide views on biodiversity. We organized in 4 cities in the U.S. and coordinated through the Danish Board on Technology with 25 countries and 4,000 individuals around the world to provide input to the 11th Council of Parties of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity that took place in October 2012. Beyond this procedural role, ECAST partners extended the conversation through creating an online poll that was hosted by the Koshlands Museum in Washington, D.C., and mirrored on the Discovery Magazine's website. We created multi-sited and zoo projects and museum programs, including biodiversity galleries and a downloadable biodiversity quest, adaptable for use by informal science education institutions around the country. ECAST wants to encourage NASA to include intensive and extensive public engagement as part of the core planning process, the Asteroid Initiative, in order for the agency to best be able to proactively design a program that will deliver on public values. In ECAST's experience, multi-sited engagement could be done at a relatively reasonable cost, and it could be executed rapidly enough so as to inform the immediate mission planning that will follow the initial Asteroid mission formulation review. Such work would also complement and extend the initial principles of the 1958 National Aeronautics and Space Act, which directed NASA to share its knowledge to the widest extent practicable. Such work can be pursued irrespective of the OMB restrictions on public outreach activities because it is actually research intended to gather new and original ideas. Such citizen engagement studies build the capacity of citizens to interact in a more nuanced way that may also have significant value for NASA designers and engineers. NASA may very well perform a more technically capable mission after such public interactions. In the end, the agency will also be better oriented to share resulting knowledge with the public because it is pursuing knowledge that the public has already found to be worthwhile. And in the closing seconds, just let me say, somewhat more personally, just the other day I was, on the occasion of its 150th anniversary, reading the Gettysburg Address to my 7-year-old son, Sam. And Sam, in addition to being a budding historian, is a budding scientist and very much loves space and space science. And it seems to me that over its lifetime, NASA has done a remarkable job of being of the people and for the people, and ECAST would like to see it be, as best it can, be by the people as well. So thank you.
Thank you, David. I'll ask you if you wouldn't mind sticking on the line. We're going to have a question period and discussion afterwards, and I'm sure there'll be questions for you later on.
Okay, I'll try to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to Margaret Race from the SETI Institute, who will also be joining us virtually.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I am also continuing the discussion of the private part of the private part that we're focused on. So while the grand challenge, excuse me, I'm trying to get the, okay, how do I advance my slides?
Here you go.
Okay.
There you go.
So we're in the grand challenge and thinking about asteroids as both opportunities and threats, and we are thinking about the elements that are related to success. Just as we heard from the previous speaker, there's lots more than just science and technology that would contribute to this success. And my talk is focusing on the parts that also involve the public in thinking about these missions, whether they are the resource missions, getting asteroids and redirecting them, or the deflection ones. I'm thinking about the risks to mission success, and it's important to identify and acknowledge that there are other impediments than just the technical and science ones, especially since we're starting to go down the road towards new activities beyond Earth orbit that have really unique features. And what I'm suggesting is a stepwise approach to research and technology development that also includes a systematic approach to looking at these other areas. So next slide. So when we think about what's involved in the challenge, everyone is quite aware of the need to think about science, whether it's observing and detecting or characterizing and modeling and predicting where the asteroids may be. The technology, whether it's a redirection technology, a deflection technology, or perhaps even exploitation, capturing, and using. And we have to think about mission planning. How do we design these missions when we think about the new technologies, proof of concept, whether we're talking about deflecting with gravity tractor or kinetic impactors or nuclear? We also have to think about reducing the risks to the mission. And then the final thing is these partnerships that we're talking about, the collaboration and the other. So on the right hand of my screen, if you will look at where it says the science and technical experts, generally what we know is that science and technical experts look at what to do and how to do it. We take an incremental approach to things. We do the research and technology development. And in this case, our success means either on the one hand we're going to save the world or develop new markets and develop new space. Next slide. Oops, sorry. That's how the scientists see it, but here's how others see the risks. The general public is saying, you want to do what? Not what are you going to do, but you want to do what? And they're asking questions about should we do it and what could go wrong. And when we think about a natural threat or a phenomenon like asteroids, there's a lot of partial or misinformation out there, in some cases even disbelief or conspiracy theories. And when we're talking about moving around asteroids, there's the potential that we take a natural hazard of some sort, and if we do something wrong, it's seen as turning it into a man-made problem. So what we're talking about is looking at the risk to the missions that are caused by responses and views and actions by the public and individuals. Because this is different than an individual making a decision to do something. This is the government or commercial groups making a decision, and the individual or the country or the societal group has little say in it. They're asking questions about who's responsible for making these decisions. Do you have the authority to do it? What are the geopolitics of it? Asking questions, as we heard earlier, is it legal? Is it in compliance with U.S. law in this case? Have you done an environmental impact statement? Are you being transparent about the information? What about lawsuits that might happen that would result in temporary restraining orders and holds on launches? They're asking questions about, is it right? Is it ethical? Are you playing God? And there's, in some cases, a distrust of technology. What if things go wrong? And so on and on you can come to these kind of questions that the public has. What we do know from research on risk, there's a repeated pattern and a process that we see of experts versus public views. This isn't the same as ignorance or fear. People, we have to recognize the multiple publics that are involved and think about a stepwise approach to addressing these. I'm coming at it from my experiences on the Mars sample return mission, where the risks have to do with bringing back potential life from outer space that might be biohazardous. And so we identified and addressed all of the potential mission impediments, legal, psychological, risk perception that people may have, education and outreach that may help it. And we took a systematic approach to exploring these new areas. And in the case of the features of asteroids as threats and resources, the public really is generally uninformed about it. They just don't know about it. And they do have unique concerns. And we're entering into new areas that have legal and policy questions that are beyond Earth orbit. If you look at the scientist and technology view of hazardous asteroids, for instance, and putting it in the context of the disaster and natural hazard literature, what we're talking about is a general threat. This general threat is looking at how do we detect them, how do we deflect them, and how do we make decisions about them. The notion is once you can detect it, and then you can decide if it's a threatening one, you can go ahead and deflect it somehow, and then make decisions at the world level that everybody is happy about, and launch a mission and have an impact and success. And if you're not successful, then you can address questions of evacuation or other actions that might be appropriate. But another way to view it is a much more accurate one, which is that we're really talking about more than just a general threat. If you think about natural hazards, there's a general threat of a flood or a hurricane, but then a more specific one once that hurricane gets named as Hurricane Charles, and then an imminent threat to the people when it's coming tomorrow. And so we have to think about those levels of information as we go along, because it's far, far more complicated. And in the public context, what we see is that the notion of asteroids is not in the collective public perception. They don't know things like orbital dynamics, direct impacts, keyhole deflection, risk corridors, deflection choices. The time delays that we have between warnings, false alarms, having pseudo-experts get involved is really something that we need to think about. And there's, of course, geopolitics and decisions about what sizes of asteroids to deflect and whether nuclear might be involved. So all of these questions are amenable to the kind of work that has been done in the risk literature all along. For those involved in asteroid redeflection and resources, you're not out of the picture of some of these risk problems as well. People are asking questions about who's making decisions and why should you be able to use those things, as we heard earlier. There's questions about legal challenges and NEPA, ownership and claims to them, private property, outer space treaty issues, and so on. And if you look at the outer space treaty, for instance, all these years we've been in geostationary or a low Earth orbit, and those are where we've played out all the legal issues. When you look at the moon and other celestial bodies on the right hand of this chart, the only thing that has been involved has been issues of planetary protection and science missions. So all of those issues that we're talking about come up brand new, whether it's asteroid mining and redirecting, questions of ownership, claims, retrieval, and U.S. law or whoever the agency is. So whether we're looking at asteroid challenges as the opportunities of using the resources or the threats from deflection, there are a lot of other elements beyond the science and technology. So for the path forward, it's important to also think about those and include them in the stepwise approach. Include research drawing from the experience of the natural hazard literature. How do we link this in with the FEMA people and others who will be acting upon it? This isn't a matter of just turning over, saying, I found it, and now it's your turn. We have to think about how to address these potential mission impediments, especially for the asteroid impact, hazardous asteroid impact and deflection areas. And there's a long lead time in this, just as in any other research. So it's important to look ahead. We want to make sure that as we get to that point where we're ready to launch, that we have provided more than just one-way information to the public, that we really are addressing what they need to know in order to make our success be their success as well.
Thank you, Margaret. And I'd also like to invite you to stay on the line as we'll be moving into questions and discussion after we finish with our presentations, if possible.
Okay.
Thank you. Next up is Joe Lepore, representing Space Design Corporation.
All right, my name is Joe Lepore, and I'll be giving a talk on Space Design's Asteroid Initiative paper. Although I'm giving the talk, this presentation was developed and written by Joseph M. Clay. Just want to give him his due. So I'd like to start off and begin with the background on how we started preparing a paper for this initiative. We looked at the forces on asteroids, and in summary, we looked at gravity, collisions, radiation pressure, solar wind, and then there's some others possible: magnetic mass loss and mass flow. We're going to be focusing on the radiation pressure and the solar wind pressure. And radiation pressure is comprised of two components. First is the direct incident, and the second is a Yarkovsky effect. And the Yarkovsky effect is a directional radiation pressure. It's caused by temperature variation from rotation. And it's a force that's acting on a rotating body, and it's caused by a difference in the direction of the absorption and the emission of radiation. So essentially, there's a lag between the incoming radiation and the temperature change of the body, and that causes that force. This is a very small force. So if we were to look at some simple relations for the radiation pressure and the solar wind pressure, the radiation pressure is a function of the solar flux and the speed of light. And if you were to reduce that down, you would find that the solar intensity will decrease with the inverse square of the distance from the sun. So that's R1 over R2 squared. And similarly, if you look at the solar wind pressure, if you were to assume constant velocity, it's going to be a function of the solar wind density, which is n, and the speed. And when you reduce that down, you also find that it's going to be a function of the inverse square of the distance from the sun, also R1 over R2 squared. So if we were to use those two relations and plot out what the pressure would be at various distances from the sun, this is what it would look like. We have two curves, one for the average radiation pressure, one for the average solar wind pressure. And you can see that the average radiation pressure starts out at about 80 newtons per square kilometer. So that's kilometer squared. So it's acting over a very large surface area. And we have listed several planet locations. Then also we have listed Eros, and that's the asteroid that we're going to be focusing on. And it's at a distance, it varies from a distance of about 1.1 AU to 1.43 AU. And we're looking at Eros because of its differences in exposed area. So as you rotate it, you can change what its exposed area is, and therefore you can change the amount of force that's being applied to it. So looking at the control of the radiation pressure and the solar wind pressure, both pressures can be controlled by changing the area exposed towards the sun if you could theoretically rotate it. And there's our test case Eros. And we're looking at a conservative minimum area, exposed area of 98.5 square kilometers, and a maximum area, or a liberal value, maximum of 374 kilometers squared. So also with the control of the radiation pressure, it has an added advantage that it can be controlled by changing the optical properties. So if you had a optical property on the surface that was black, that would be having a solar absorptance of 1.0. And if you were able to change that and move off to the right on this chart, you could go all the way to absorptivity of 0, which would be a specular mirrored surface. And by doing that, you would be able to effectively change the magnitude of the radiation pressure by a factor of 2. So that's a second way that we can control the force. So if we look at what the maximum forces are at the apogee and the perigee of Eros, what we look at here is the delta. Since we're able to, or we can theoretically rotate the Eros, we can change what its exposed area is. We could see maximum differences of 1361 newtons at the apogee and 2254 newtons at the perigee. And Newton is about a quarter of a pound, just to give you what kind of ballpark values we are looking at there. So now if we theoretically move the Earth into the path of Eros, so this is not the actual location, obviously, but just theoretically, if we did that, we're looking at what would the delta V on the far left there, the delta VB, have to be in order to change the path of Eros so that it would then miss the Earth. So you need to change it by at least the radius of the Earth, which is 6378 kilometers. So in just looking at some simple orbital mechanics, we calculated that the delta V would have to be about 0.24 meters per second. So if you were to use that 0.24 meters per second, and then use the max force that we showed on, or I showed on slide 7, and the mass of Eros, we can calculate how long it would take in order to achieve this, and it comes out to be about 37,400 Earth years. So obviously that doesn't look like a practical solution. And even if you were to substitute in, instead of the 1361, even if you were to use the maximum force at the perigee, we're still looking at tens of thousands of years. So now changing it up just a little bit, we're talking about the partnerships or markets for partnerships. And can markets be defined to support NASA's Asteroid initiative? So in a very, very general sense, technology drivers are needed to create technologies which would feed these hypothetical markets. And what we want to do is to determine what these markets are. So looking at kind of a simple view of NASA's current architecture, you have the SLS, which is used to bring Orion out to a lunar DRO, distant retrograde orbit. And you have SEPHEO, which can be used to capture a small asteroid, maybe 10 to 12 meters in size, and then use solar electric propulsion to push it back, where you could rendezvous with Orion. And then you could do a EVA to go off and examine and study it. So what we're looking for are markets to fill this type of architecture. Okay, almost done. And one of these would be that after this type of a mission is complete, then the asteroid is left there at the lunar DRO for further study. So in conclusion, the radiation forces and solar wind forces are significant but not capable of full-scale asteroid deflection. So other forces must be found to successfully deflect the asteroids. And market forces could be used to guide the NASA architecture, and perhaps a public-private partnership could help.
Okay. Thank you, Joe.
All right, thank you.
Next up, we have Tony Freeman joining us from the Jet Propulsion Lab. He will be joining us virtually.
Good morning. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. It just wasn't able to fit that in the schedule this time. But thank you for letting me talk about this topic. So what I'm here to do this morning is actually solve all the problems of the Asteroid Initiative by bundling together all of the ideas into a coherent program that then NASA can defend and move forward with. And I had help putting this together from Bob Cesarone and Joel Cecil, but also Steve Matusek. So programs are how NASA does business. We have many programs within NASA, within the human programs, the science programs, and Earth science in particular, Living with a Star, for example. And the Asteroid Initiative is very well suited to such a structure. So here's the list of programs that we pulled together that showed some of the amazing programs that NASA does. Some of them, like the Mars program, were voted the most successful program in the U.S. government. That's hard to imagine, but that a NASA program would be judged that way. But you know, we do a pretty good job at this particular type of management. But there is no current overarching NASA program that's targeted specifically at small bodies, whether that's asteroids or other bodies like comets. The closest we get is the Near-Earth Object Observation Program, which is great, but you know, it's more or less a standalone activity. So who would be the stakeholders for a program? Well, the science community, human spaceflight, who are targeting asteroids as a destination, the commercial world with space resources, and then, as we've seen in some of the other talks, planetary protection. It's pretty easy to map the initiative activities into a traditional program structure with advanced studies, technology development, robotic missions, ground-based observations, crewed operations on the manned side, commercialization, and education and public outreach. So what would the objectives be? Well, you could argue about this for days, and I'm sure if NASA set up a program structure, there would be arguments for days about exactly what the wording was, exactly what the objectives were, but it would be something like increasing the opportunities for human space exploration beyond Earth orbit, along the way to Mars, protecting the Earth from future asteroid impacts, and fostering a new commercial space business that uses the resources that these asteroids represent, with U.S. industry leading the way, and advancing key space technologies essential for the future. And if something like that could be agreed on, a lot of decisions become very easy afterwards. To look at the priorities, you could take a sieve like this one, which represents on the left-hand side all of the RFI inputs that bounded into ground-based observations and technologies and science and partnerships and different widgets and payloads, different ideas for missions. And you could bundle all of that together in a road mapping activity that used something like the JPL-A team to brainstorm, analyze, prioritize, and then synthesize options that were highest payoff for the stakeholder community. And then examine the space components of those in more detail using something like our Team X, which does a very good job of point designs. So lots of technologies. I'm not going to list all of them off, but obviously solar electric propulsion is on a lot of people's minds. Robotics and autonomous systems, the kind of sensors we need. There's an underlying base of technology required, and most programs have that, or they go to the Office of the Chief Technologist and say, here are our requirements defined to meet these program needs, and please implement a technology program that addresses that. Another advantage to having a program structure is you get out of the lottery game. If you look at the missions listed here that are NASA, either APL or Goddard or JPL, they're either, when they addressed an asteroid or a comet objective, it was done as a very secondary or tertiary science objective along the way to the main target, or it was done through the competition of the Discovery and New Horizons programs. And that's great, and that asteroid science has done pretty well over the years. But if you talk to the folks who work in Venus science in the planetary world, they haven't won the lottery ever on Discovery and New Frontiers. We haven't had a Venus mission since Magellan. And past success is no indicator of future performance, as I'm sure most of you are aware. So there's no guarantee that you'll win a Discovery or a New Frontiers competition with an asteroid mission in the next 20 years. So it could be a long time before we see another asteroid mission in the competed world. In a program structure, you get to define your requirements, have some work that's assigned, some work that's competed, and it's much easier to get that addressed. The items in red are all the international missions that we could identify that addressed some of the objectives of asteroids and other small bodies. And I have to say that NASA involvement in these is, at best, minimal. It's usually one scientist or two scientists on the science team who are, communicating with the rest of the community, but the missions don't get to address major objectives for a program, which would be beneficial. I have to say the ground-based community does a lot better job of this. They communicate quite well across the international community, and there are commercial involvement, as we've learned in this workshop, that seems to be working pretty well, but I think it would still be better bound up in a program structure. One objective that you might identify for a program is an outpost for a translunar asteroid, where you take the asteroid, and if people go to it and provide capability and leave it there in place for others to use, they are then entitled to a use of some of the resources that are available there, which include the material on the asteroid for either science use or for commercial use, or to demonstrate a new technology that could advance human exploration. Most programs have commercialization arms, and that's usually done through the commercial technology offices at the field centers or within NASA itself. And then programs have education and public outreach, where it's a coherent strategy. Again, I hate to bring it back to Mars, but the Mars rover outreach has been widely praised. It's part of the Mars program, and it's basically a planned activity that supports the missions and the science and the technology development all as one coherent package. And then finally, the missing piece in the initiative was science. Nothing wrong with that. NASA programs do have elements that are independent of science, but there's enough science going on in small bodies and asteroids in particular that you could bundle that in under the auspices of a program and steer some of those science opportunities towards advancing the overall objectives of an asteroid initiative. So I think that's the conclusion of my talk. Is basically this would all be very nicely wrapped up in a bow in a program. It's what NASA knows how to do, and it also gives you a line item in the budget that you can defend to OMB and to Congress and to the National Academy and whoever else has an interest in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And if you two wouldn't mind sticking on the line, if possible, to be able to join in answering questions as they come up in the discussion.
Sure, I'd be happy to do so.
Very good, thank you. And our last presenter, Jean-Claude Piedboeuf, representing the Canadian Space Agency, will close it out for us. Jean-Claude.
Okay. Thank you. And just to say, I'm replacing Christian Lange that prepared the slide, and he was participating to the last version of the workshop, but was not able to come this time. So the first slide said 30 years of space exploration. I would say more likely it's 50 years of exploration. In Canada, we started our space program 50 years ago, and it was interesting, the discussion on commercial activities. I think space exploration is opening the way. It's a new frontier, and in Canada, when we started 50 years ago to sense things in space, it created now a space economy in Canada, like in SATCOM, navigation and Earth observation. But this is really because the government started and said, okay, we want to explore space, that these industry exists today. And so when we talk about space exploration today, we are now building the economy of tomorrow by doing the exploration and going. We are in LEO, we go beyond Earth orbit. So this is an important aspect. But more recently, our exploration has been focusing on space robotics, vision system, and also contribution to science mission, especially for Mars and some asteroid mission. And space astronomy is also a strong focus for us. So the international context is important also. From a human exploration point of view, since a few years there is a discussion, and some of you have been participating and know about the global exploration strategy that was created or written, and it's interesting. It was started after the NASA announcement of the moon return, and our U.S. announcement of the moon return, and the international community was asked to participate, and so we, at that point, the international community said, okay, moon is good, but Mars and asteroid and Lagrange point are also good, and so NASA said, okay, we will include everything in this global exploration strategy. And one of the results was also the creation of the AIISWC, the International Space Exploration Coordination Group, that again is focusing a lot on human exploration, but also including science, and more are looking how can we manage robotic and human exploration together, so each benefit from each other. And there was the Global Exploration Roadmap published in 2011, and a new one published this year, a revised version. So these are documents that are a kind of agreement between at least 10 space agencies, mainly from North America, North America, Europe, and Asia. But so it is significant. It's really showing a direction where we can go in terms of exploration, and recently also the benefit from space exploration has been published. It's clear from a Canadian point of view, and I think it's clear for others also, that space exploration needs to respond to the priority of the government, and if it's not doing that, asteroid, moon, or Mars, or anything will not go forward. So the Global Exploration Roadmap is interesting in the sense that we say, okay, the long-term vision is that to have human on Mars. We know we already have robots on Mars since a few years now, and a recurrent series of missions. So from a robotic point of view, Mars is the program is underway already. But from a human point of view, this is the long-term view from many space agencies. And in the meantime, we need to develop some capabilities to go there. And the cislunar space is a good place, and asteroid also. It's a good way to learn to do that. So from a Canadian point of view, we have been focusing on few technology in terms of space exploration and in terms of the space program in general. And I will mention a few here, but I will cover that by saying we are focusing on optics and robotics. That's basically vision system and robotics, and starting a few new things. We recently, as part of the 2009 Economic Action Plan, government gave money to additional fund to the Canadian Space Agency, and we developed the next generation of the space arm, which is an advanced generation. And this one could be used for space servicing and an asteroid mission to retrieve a sample or to basically capture things. So this technology is especially the small arm that you can see here, which is like the Dexter, which is on the space station right now. It's not far to be ready to fly, and we have a new long arm that is telescopic boom now, so that can fit on smaller launcher vehicle as compared to the space shuttle where the Canadarm2 was launched. We have been working also in active vision system for quite some time. Canada started with a kind of optic vision system in the early day of the space shuttle and the space station, and realized that optic, it's not easy in space because of the lighting condition, and so switch really to the kind of laser-based camera. And since then, we have been using that for many activity. And one of them is when the shuttle needed an inspection system. NASA went to a company in Canada to procure that system because we have been developing and it was already demonstrated for space utilization. On the Phoenix mission, a Mars mission, we provided again another LiDAR system to measure the atmosphere. There was some commercials like XSS-11. It was done a pure commercial cell also to use a LiDAR system to track a satellite. And more recently we demonstrated a TRIDAR, which is a kind of laser system again to estimate the pose of a vehicle. And we are providing, and it's really pertinent here, is the laser system again for the mapping of an asteroid for the OSIRIS-REx mission, which is designed based on the XSS-11 and the Phoenix. So you can see there's some continuity and there's a strong expertise in Canada to provide that type of system. And this is a bit of detail on the OSIRIS-REx laser altimeter. So obviously this is a system to do a rendezvous with an asteroid. So it's pretty easy to make the link with an asteroid mission. The CIS system could be improved and make better, and could be almost a direct contribution to such a mission. I heard that there is not much observation of near-Earth object. Recently, we launched a small satellite, a microsatellite, this size. And one of the goal of this satellite is to observe near-Earth objects. So, and I think, if I am right, it will be the first one to be dedicated to do such an activity. It's based on we have the MOST, which is a microsatellite for space astronomy, which is very successful. Was designed for 1 year and now has been for 10 years in space. So. And so this new satellite, NeoSat, is still going in not confirmation, but we are trying to find a term. But basically uploading the software, and we have not yet done the first capture the first image, but it should be done soon. So this one is could be also a contribution to know at least where you want to go. If you want to capture an asteroid, you still need to find where. And lastly, we have been working with, I would say mainly NASA, for the Moon mission, which was called Resolve and now called the Resource Prospector mission, and developing the rover and the drill. And the drill, with some adaptation, obviously, could be used for an asteroid mission if you want to capture a core. This is a drilling that do a core sample. And we have also a mini core, which can be used just to do a very small core. So the drill can do, I think, 1 or 2 meter core now. And so that type of technology with some adaptation, because it's based on gravity, and Moon, even if the gravity is slower, there is still some gravity. So in conclusion, this asteroid initiative is interesting. We will follow that closely and see if it's materialized in some real mission. We have the industry in Canada has the capacity to provide something, and there is some interest from a Canadian point of view to do so. So we are looking to that. We are studying that, and we think it's a good opportunity for Canada to position the Canadian industry, and obviously it's need the government. It has to be based on government priorities, and in Canada we are revising our space program, so we will follow that very closely to see if something can be contributed. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes our presentations for today. I'd like to, if possible, focus the questions for the next couple of minutes, 15 or so, from the last group of speakers. and then we can transition in more of the wide-ranging discussion of covering all the ideas that have been brought forth. So, Joe, do we have anything coming in?
Yeah, actually more of a comment than a question for David at Arizona State. This is from Linda Billingsley. She indicates that there's a need to engage everyone to participate in the deliberations and invite disruptors into like-minded groups. And I don't know if he wanted to expand on that any at all.
Thank you to Linda for that comment or question. And the invitation of disruptors into groups of engaged in public deliberation is a great idea for certain purposes. And there are times when you want those disruptions, when you want to have some divergent thinking, when you want to shake things up, and there are other purposes for which you need more convergent thinking. And I think that should NASA or any other agency decide that it wants to engage in a broad-based public deliberation activity, it has to be very clear about the kind of public engagement it wants and whether that role will be to open things up a bit, broaden and disrupt some current thought, or whether it wants some more convergent kinds of recommendations. And you have the same kinds of issues that crop up with technical advisory committees as well that operate under consensus or that operate under different kinds of rules and that get different direction from the agencies to which they're giving advice.
Thank you.
May I add in a comment here? This is Margaret Race.
Please.
Okay, the disruptors idea is a very good one because there's what we need to do is be mindful of the fact that this is not single discussions, single decisions that are being made. At the recent Planetary Defense Conference in Arizona, it was last April, there was a conference-wide simulation that involved everyone that participated, and they took on different roles, whether it was looking at the science, the technology, and some of the issues that came up with asteroid deflection were quite surprising. So some groups of people took on the role of being individual countries, for instance, making decisions within the context of the UN. And they actually voted against the asteroid deflection. There are questions of having a nuclear launch, for instance, that outer space treaty would have to be waived in some way, and we don't have a proof of concept. So there are risks at many, many levels, and the idea of bringing in disruptors, or at least acknowledging that these risks are real, is something important. And that's what I think both David and my focus is on, thinking ahead to the kinds of risks that can come up to the mission and the kind of success that we want to see. But those risks are coming in areas that we can't necessarily address with science and technology. So we have to think about how to go through the actual process of communicating not one way, but looking at what information we're going to give to experts in a FEMA situation, what information we give to the public, the mass media. There's just so many places.
This is Dave again. I would endorse that very much.
Thank you. Any questions in here in the room?
This is a question for the Yarkovsky effect on the Eros analysis. So that's a dozen kilometer-sized asteroid. How do the numbers play out with an irregularly shaped, like 100-meter-sized object?
I really don't have any data for that. I really don't have any data on that right now. I would have to consult with Joe Clay on that.
It would be great to see an analysis like that.
All right.
Any other questions for this last panel? Let me throw one out. And this may get our discussion started as we seem ready to transition into the discussion that I'm hoping will facilitate some sense of what the findings out of this session ought to be, because ultimately this is our session to be shared together. We had a number of presenters that were selected based on their RFI responses, and now's an opportunity for us, based on that, to engage in conversation that will lead into the planning process. And so I'll focus it on this last panel, but we can expand it beyond as well, and that is, how would you measure successful public engagement? It's easy for us to talk about that this is something that we want to do, and maybe particularly for David and Margaret to kick us off on that. And then a follow-up to that, can you give us some examples of success from your perspective, so that we have an idea of something that we might be working towards? I know there was a little bit of that, David, in your presentation, but I'd like to expand on that some.
Okay, thank you. That's an incredibly critical and important question about measuring the success of public engagement. And I think the trick is to realize that, just like with other forms of advice or technology assessment, that the critical measure is not necessarily that there's some silver bullet that comes from the public and has a discernible impact on exactly what's going on. If we use that criterion, then a whole lot of, for example, what the National Academies does would not be worthwhile doing. But I think our criteria of success need to rest in the area of capacity building and learning among both the specific and the broad array of individuals who are involved in the activities. So have the people who have been engaged learned not just substantively, but procedurally and, if you will, reflexively about their own role in the process? Have the elite actors, the folks, say, at NASA who are designing programs and projects, have they learned, maybe they have learned something substantively through the interaction, but more importantly, have they learned about process, and have they learned about how to approach their activities more reflexively, with a greader degree of self-awareness and awareness of the public role that they're pursuing? And that learning opportunity begins to build a capacity, as I think I tried to suggest in the talk, of making the public and making the folks in the agency with whom the public is engaged more sophisticated and more nuanced about that conversation. Now, there could be real and concrete influence on the project itself, and that would be a goal as well, but I think the success really has to be measured by the increased capacity and the learning that goes on among the participants.
Thank you.
This is Margaret Race again. When I look at it in terms of the natural hazards community, there's a lot of research that's been done over the decades on how do we respond to natural disasters and threats of different sorts. And if you look at the history of something like fire, we know what fire is, the public knows what fire is, they respond to it, and there are examples of it all the time, so we're kind of, we have a collective memory of these things. Asteroids are very different than that, especially when we're talking about asteroid deflections for planetary defense. There is no collective memory. The public doesn't understand a lot of the terminology, and it's unclear even what we would do to tell FEMA-type agencies or regional emergency response folks what to do. So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes information that has to go along with this. And we want to, again, think about not just one-way delivery of information to the public, but information that they can use. Thinking in terms of just the typhoon, for instance, that just happened in the Philippines, that's what we're up against. We're up against the potential threat of something like that. And what would we tell an individual, especially if we have a multiple-year warning of something like that? What is an evacuation in those situations? So these are things that are important to consider ahead of time. They don't change the fact that the science and technology is looking to deflect the asteroids, but on the ground, dealing with the risks and talking about the education, it's way more than just asteroid deflection. It's really risk in governance at the local area.
This is Tony Freeman. I think you raise a very good point. There's a good analogy to the 2004 tsunami. It had been a long time since we'd had a tsunami that was that deadly, and technologies, science, a lot have changed since the last time we had one of those things. And afterwards, a lot of really good work was done looking at the concept of operations. How do you get people alerted? How do you get people warned? What technologies do you use? But also, how do you educate them? And I think that's a very instructive area for us to look at for the asteroid program.
Speaking from California, I could tell you that we have sort of a 10-year window when it comes to earthquakes. If you don't have them every so often, people sort of get complacent. And that is the issue also about the decisions. In Italy right now, there has been a legal case where some scientists who suggested that we wouldn't have another earthquake are actually found guilty and are facing prison time for liability in making a wrong decision because people went back to their homes and then the earthquake hit and people died. So this will play out, and certainly in terms of, I'll say, a Chelyabinsk situation, it could have been worse, but there's one where it came in from the blind. Nobody could even have predicted it in time. So we have to recognize that these things will happen, and that's part of the education that gets given to the public as well, the uncertainties.
Thank you. Jean-Claude.
Yeah, I will see public engagement from another point of view. We just had a quite successful astronaut in space with Chris Hadfield, and which basically was able to attract public attention. And it seems spontaneous, but it was really a preparation, more than 2 years of preparation to do that. So public engagement should not be done only on fear of something, but try really, and not just to learn or to educate the public. It's really the public is basically it's public money. So if the public is not supporting that, is not engaged, it's very difficult to sustain an activity. So, and we have been thinking about that, given the success of the Chris flight and how much the public like it. Could we repeat that for robotic mission? And probably yes, but we have to really think about the public engagement as a requirement. It's like a requirement that we need a sensor to do this thing, we need to capture this. We need some requirement that will be linked purely to the public engagement. And this has to be think very early in when you design the mission, and not after the fact and say, okay, we do that for science or for protection, and then, oh, by the way, we need now to engage the public because this is part of our mandate. And so it's really something you have to be ready to spend money on engaging the public, and maybe adding an HD camera on your system, which has no scientific goal, which has no technical goal, but you will provide nice image, and you have to also to engage the public in all the difficulty of your mission. Say, okay, now we have this, and we are designing this. This is difficult. If you don't give the information and you are not using the social media the way it has been used with Chris, then it's very difficult to engage the public.
Thank you.
The difference again with the engaging the public with the positive parts of space, and even the idea of putting a camera on, is very good. And those things are very positive, even the Mars missions, and engaging the public in basic research and exploration. And so the asteroid deflection and resource use missions may be perceived differently there than the risk of a hazardous one. So there are two different kinds of communication that has to happen. And I agree that the public engagement of a positive sort is very important, but we also have to address the risks on the other side.
When I hear the term engagement, I actually think a little bit more strongly than in the context it's being used here. I think engagement is something that's deeper than simply being a click-through on a web link to a mission page. I think if you want to engage the public, it's going to involve things that actually actively get them to participate in. And I'm not sure what those things are, but I know that certainly in the world today, people engage by spending money, they speak with their pocketbooks, they speak in career choices, they do other things. And I'm just not sure that these passive observations of missions are sufficient engagement to really make this work out in the long term.
Before we jump into further thoughts, Jen reminded me we're going to be focusing on that very thing this afternoon in the crowdsourcing citizen science, as well as the next gen engagement tomorrow morning. So we will have an opportunity to kind of dig in there a little bit. But I saw a bunch of hands go up, and there's a mic up in the audience already.
Do you want me to wait then?
Please.
Well, I was just going to say, along those lines, there are, in fact, several ways you can engage the public that are not just the follow along, read up on the stuff. And in fact, we're engaging several different different companies where the crowd is used to develop parts of your system, whether that's simple videos or software or PR infographics. And so there's actual public ways that you can get people involved in the development and operations of your missions. And there's lots of those platforms out there now. So we work with them, and that's a little plug, but we can talk more about that this afternoon.
Regarding the... Go ahead.
This is Dave again, if I may.
Please.
On the strength of public engagement and the way that the, say, ECAST and the Science Museum and Science Center community has come to understand it is that the difference between the sort of public understanding, which would be the click-through activity, and public engagement is really about a two-way conversation, and one that goes deeper than simply technical understanding, but has to do with understanding the kinds of values that are brought to bear on the agenda and the framing of any particular initiative. And I think that, yes, a lot of those crowdsourcing techniques are able to engage people in the sense that they become active participants in the research, in the exploration, which is wonderful, but that tends only to happen for people who are otherwise paying attention. And that doesn't quite create opportunities for people who may not have attention, may not have the skills to participate in that way, and yet those other kinds of people still deserve and in many instances require the opportunity to help frame through their own values the kinds of things that are being done in their name.
I'll let Charlie address the public outreach crowd stuff because I know he's an expert at that, but coming from the defense side, which is I think where the speakers were addressing, there's a very interesting and subtle game that gets played often. For example, the U.S. military cannot advertise or lobby publicly as far as recruiting people, but they can run recruiting ads, which are super cool and make them look like superheroes and enroll the public and keep the public support for the military high. They can legally do that, but they can't advertise, support your military. Now, in the quest to deal with the defensive aspects, the civil defense aspects of things, and in that activity, by engaging in that activity, the education that goes with it, hey, we may have a tsunami, here's what you do in terms of that tsunami, and getting people in that preparatory mode and educating them as a part of that, what you can actually do, and this is probably appropriate for a private sector guy more than a government sector person to talk about overtly, is what you're doing is very slowly and in a very careful way building constituency for support of larger activities in that realm on the planetary defense side. So by getting out there and talking to people about, I have seen people walk into congressional offices of legislators who had coastal districts and literally walk right up to the map and go, if a tsunami of this size hits here, this part of your state's gone. And that gets their attention in a very interesting way. And then you go in and talk to local officials. I handed the new mayor of Houston a copy of Rain and Iron and Ice and said, you might want to look at those gates you're putting in the Houston Harbor idea, things like that. So you can get them going in that way, and then that can translate into broader support. And I'll give that to Charlie.
Thanks. To try and address Jason's question, as I often say, I think the answer is all of the above. Clearly, we need engagement and participation pre-launch. Clearly, we need engagement and analysis on threats. Clearly, we need to measure quick click-throughs and how many people sit in Times Square to watch the event. Engagement, as correctly was pointed out, is a spectrum of opportunities, whether it's, in our case, upload your song, or we have a Spanish poet from the 1700s whose family are contributing poetry to the Cosmic Archive. What my experience has been in now almost 20 years of providing public participation missions is I knew back in 1982 when I was a young man and we had a rocket on the launch pad at Matagorda Island, that when that rocket took off, that was a feeling that I'd never had before because it was my rocket. I was involved in the mission. The same is true for our Celestis missions. When they know when the families come and they know their loved one is fulfilling their dreams, that's a connectivity to what might otherwise be a very boring mission of a Korean satellite into space that carries on and interconnects over generations. For Sunjammer, we've created what we call mind files and bio files, where you can send yourself into deep space as part of the archive. We'll have an interactive mission control. We'll have the first private mission control that will permit people to come in and, after certain qualifications, actually steer the spacecraft. So there's innumerable, the public's hungry to be involved in space and to be directly involved in space as opposed to watching, what's the phrase I heard, a few highly paid civil servants orbit the Earth. That's great work, but the public doesn't necessarily connect to that. When they're really involved, personally involved in some way in that mission, as I mentioned to the owner of the rocket that we flew on last year, you may think that's your rocket, but I've got 500 people here with families on board who know it's theirs. And that kind of connectivity does come from more than just a link following and reading about the information. It's active engagement throughout the mission. And people want it. And not only do they want it, they will pay for it, just as they pay for experiences today. And those funds can be used to do future missions or to enhance current missions. And the fact that we're beginning an era where that's okay, where it's no longer, oh, this mission is mine, I'm the government, you can't do anything about it, with it, or touch it. We're past that, I think, now, and I think you'll see broad elements of engagement, such as the kinds of things that we're looking at here.
All right, and I just want to try to make a clarifying comment, because I think there's three games at play here. So there's engagement about the risks, which I think Margaret had a lot of interesting things to talk about. There's engagement of how do you have like a hit sensation when you're in the middle of it, the public is following along and they're really enjoying it. And then there's this idea from David's ECAS presentation about sort of citizen policy. How do you figure out what the broadest goals should be? How do you figure out what the next CRITS Hadfield robotic mission should be? Or how do you figure out exactly what the public thinks should be the right balance on risk in future asteroid missions, or exactly what they think the goal should be there? And I think what's so interesting is an intellectual framework from this anticipatory governance that was proposed by ECAS is that they've also got specific experience in proposing different activities on how to actually pulse the public and to try to have it's this nuanced interaction where you can't really get it through crowdsourcing. It's having experts who help present the information and the material in a way that's accessible to like non-standard actors. And I think it's a different framework that is worth taking away from this.
Can we pull up the discussion slides? I'd like to spark some. I've got some more questions that I've put on a slide to help us kind of zero in a little bit.
As you pull up the slides, this is Margaret Reese again. I think the last speaker speaking about the different ways of looking at communication and engagement is the real key. What the problem is, or the challenge is that we have to make sure we engage the public in appropriate ways across all the different things. It's not just, this is not PR, this is not just giving people science information. We really have to be very attentive to what it is that and what part of the mission or the objective we're informing people about.
And Zach, I would add a fourth category, actually, as we're talking about kind of a higher level schema that you started to lay out. The fourth category being the public or individuals meaningfully contributing to components of either the mission or the grand challenge. So the amateur astronomer that goes out and takes the observation, or the folks that are subscribed to SLU, which we'll hear about later this afternoon, that are actually using telescopes that are owned by a broader community and finding time on that telescope to do observations of their own, or crowdsourcing through existing data on things like Zooniverse, like Planetary Resources is going to be doing. So actually contributing to the meaningful work as well, not just participating in discussions or being informed.
One very serious consideration that needs to be taken very seriously is that you guys are here representing the front end of a conceptual shift of getting the public involved. When you go back to your offices and it hits a wall of lawyers and it hits a wall of policy people, it begins to evaporate. One example is here at Johnson Space Center. They've built this great little building that is all about hackers and makers, and it's really cool, and it's got great furniture and dry erase boards, and there's a 3D printing machine, and it's like beanbag chairs. It's like ready for that, well under 30 crowd to roll in there and get creative. The problem is it's inside the gates and you have to get badged. And that's a lawyer problem where the intention was right, but there is not an understanding that that whole process of government badging, for example, is antithetical to the very blue jean culture that they are trying to get in there and innovate with. So when you carry back all these great ideas, there needs to be a depth of penetration back into the agency so that it doesn't end at the superficial front end of this event. So that the lawyers get a memo from their bosses saying, we need you to review, because they're not in this room with you guys getting this input. You're going to carry out some great ideas and they're going to die on a lawyer's desk.
I'll take exception with that in the sense that I was late to this event yesterday because I was speaking to the OGC staff about this very mission. And Jen can probably speak much better than I because she's been partnered with the General Counsel's office for quite some time. And I would say that we've got a really great partnership with the attorneys that we're working with at our level. Mm-hmm. And I've done time in NASA. I left and came back, and I would say it's better than I've ever seen it. I hear examples that Bo Naz gives about a CRADA method that's working really well, and Charlie Chafer's talking about the Sunjammer, and so I think we might be perceived as kind of a front edge, but I don't feel that if that is actually what the perception is, that it's just a couple of people up here alone. There are a lot of people behind us.
I wasn't inferring that. I'm just saying that that's a constant thing. As the gentleman mentioned earlier about the NIAC proposal.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a good example.
That's a great example and see, that's why this is helpful. And that's why it's so fantastic to be here in conversation to say, I wouldn't have known that. Yeah. But we can go back and have that conversation and say, hey guys, because the intention is good, we just don't always execute. And so this is where it's helpful to bring this stuff up.
Well, in that case, the A-team, go.
And so this is where I wanted to pivot into some discussion points, because we focused in on engagement. But really throwing it out, we've got not quite a half hour left. And we got an opportunity to put some findings in that will be factored into some planning. And so it was great to hear about the NIAC difficulties. Are there other areas that you're struggling with, that when we look at trying to build partnership opportunities going forward, what can we do to be better and more responsive? Are there walls that you've come up against beyond just NIAC? If you could design the system on your own, blank piece of paper,
So I'm gonna maybe go back to Scott's presentation
Yeah.
as a launch point. So one of the things he mentioned was a demo day.
yeah.
So if you're trying to build something new and different, one of the things you face when you run into the government is they've been doing it their way for quite some time. And unless you have an opportunity to show them what you're doing in a kind of a free and open environment, you don't often get that audience. And I think something like a demo day is a good way for you to see that there's something else out there. There's a better way to do some things. You know, some of the traditional processes like SBIRs or STTRs, they just get buried in a corner somewhere. Maybe that's a way where you can get more of those ideas out in front and then allow them to show you what can be done kind of against the old guard.
This is Tony Freeman at JPL. NASA also have a tool, a vehicle they can use to partner with industry called the Cooperative Agreement Notice. It's actually pretty powerful. You get a lot of latitude. Usually industry has to bring some matching funds to the table, but it actually has been used in a wide variety of areas to get direct involvement and engagement.
David.
A simple thing that would help outsiders feel the shape of the elephant would be easily accessible org charts for offices. Some parts of NASA do publish org charts. Others, you just have to deduce who reports to who and how the structure is built.
Okay. Good.
And I'd suggest going beyond the org charts back to what are the actual technical challenges that are out there. A lot of times you need that seed. I think back 15 years to being in college and trying to figure out what to do as a master's project and not knowing what the real challenges were and where there would be value. If you can lay out that underlying framework, not just the high level strategic goals, but examples of some of the pieces to start getting people thinking about where they could contribute and where their capabilities and resources best align.
So as a member of the robotics concept integration team, you know, I was talking with David and Rick just a while ago, but what would really help us is if you could really identify that just the top 3 areas that we can take back to headquarters or GERST or whatever and say, this suggestion, these top 3 suggestions would help better enable our mutual relationships. So if you can give me some food there that can be taken back, and maybe we can do something about this.
Yeah. Do we have a sense of what the top 3 looks like?
I can add some of the things that I heard during the conversation to try to add some more fodder. One was, of course, the visibility aspects that you brought up. So trying to make sure that NASA can also play the role of helping potential partners that are seeking mutual interest get some visibility from their partnership as well in doing so with NASA. I think some of the others that we heard were NASA can just simply state things. David, one of the things that you mentioned was NASA stating the importance of in-space resources just stating the importance, and that can serve as a kind of advanced market commitment of sorts of the future of space exploration that could help drive some of the companies that are seeking to drive that activity in space. And so there's some things that are communication activities, right? Making statements, taking positions, helping promote. Was one kind of set of activities that we saw. But then also I heard many comments on the vehicles that we use, right, to partner. I think it was also you maybe that brought up the 300 pages of requirements that you had to read through to submit a 3-page document back, right? So the RFI in many ways was a first step to engagement. How do we continue that? But the structural kind of elements of how you partner, CRADA or cooperative agreement, as Tony said, or FAR or COTS or PRIZE, and there's many mechanisms that could be used differently, but making sure to look at which mechanism might further the mutual benefit that everybody wants the most. So it's 2 that I heard, might be others.
So dovetail off of yours a little bit, I think some clarity around NASA's own business model. Where do you want to be the builder-doer versus the buyer versus the collaborator at different points of the mission? And then allowing industry to push back and say, yeah, you said you wanted to be the doer of that, but that is so simple. Why would you spend big government dollars to do that? Or that's the most lucrative. Why would you spend big government dollars? That's where we can be motivated to go do that. So some clarity around that. And I think that gets back to David's point as well. If you make that statement that we're going to be a buyer of the service, there are going to be 20 companies pop up and figure out how to deliver it. And if you say I'm going to be a doer of this service, well, I'm not going to go build that because I don't have the pockets to necessarily compete unless it's extremely lucrative.
Pound home on that because I've been pounding on that one for about 20 years, and that's the idea that at that top level, if the government can sit down and go, okay, settlement, science, and safety, those are the 3 main areas we're looking at when we're dealing with NEOs, or safety in terms of planetary defense, science in terms of expanding the scientific base of humanity or the U.S., and settlement is we're blazing a path for you. So you lock those in at the very top level, and then bring together some people from the different communities, and this is a part of it. And maybe some more expert people in a different setting, the ones who are really hands-on, directly involved, and then maybe on the more grassroots thing, more people involved, and sit down and go, okay, in each of these areas, once you have that top-level decision, your other decisions under that cascade out of it. It becomes clear. If the goal is settlement, then you have to have an economy. If you're going to have an economy, then the government needs to look at every activity it's doing as to, does this enable the development of an economy, which is what he was saying, or does it inhibit? Are these operational tasks? Can these be handed off? Or are these ones that catalyze? Should we be an anchor tenant, or should we announce we're going to build the building, even though we know somebody else can build that building, and we could just be an anchor tenant and enable them getting financing to build that building? There are a lot of models actually outside of space where government does that very effectively. The FBI or IRS rolls into a city and says, we're going to have this floor of the new building. We are now an anchor tenant. They can get financing, then build the whole building. Those kinds of relationships. And then, by putting it in terms of we're not doing it for you, you are doing it with us. And then that trickles all the way down to the crowdsourcing and getting the kids involved in anything. Because it's not NASA astronauts performing, climbing around the popcorn package, pulling out gravel on an asteroid or something. It is an entire series of activities that involve the entire broad U.S. public pushing forward on these different areas that are going to lead to these 3 things that they are a part of and they will reap the rewards from, and it's their face at the end. It's their kid that's going to be going out there. That kind of thing makes it personal.
Rick said something earlier about giving the book A Rain of Fire and Ice to the new Houston mayor. And this is a comment about the messaging that's contained within the idea that NASA states something. You know, after the last workshop meeting that Sunday, 60 Minutes had a great spot on the Chelyabinsk explosion and stuff. And I was thinking, oh, this is fantastic. What a great way to represent the risk to the public. But at the end of it, the NASA scientists who were there really kind of, I'm not saying they understated it. I think they were very accurate. But I think there was the amount of drama that could have been contained in their statement missing. You know, they really said, oh, you know, I left the program saying, oh, well, they said it's really nothing to worry about. And I think that's not exactly the messaging that is most convenient to the situation.
This gathering and the RFI has been pointed to as a step. How has this felt? Is this valuable? Has this opportunity to gather and discuss been a valuable process? How would you change it? If we're recognizing that we're trying to get ideas to plan and move forward, how would you design? What would that look like?
Sorry. Yeah, you guys have been awesome. I mean, I think it's great that you're doing this. And again, if you can get the depth and penetrate deep into that headquarters building in D.C., that's great. Or more importantly, maybe the center director's offices. That would be even better. But find an auditorium that doesn't have theater-style seating. Okay? Because it implies that you're talking to us. Might be part of it, or have breakouts that go off and work on focused areas and bring it back and that kind of thing. But I definitely want to say I've spoken to a lot of people, people that weren't here the day after the original one got canceled and weren't blah, 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 you know, officially anywhere or whatever, but people who interacted, and they feel really good about what's happening. And I think you're, you know, this is a good approach. The rest of NASA could learn from you guys on this, I think. So.
Any of the questions that are thrown up on the board, how would you like to participate with NASA? Are there technologies that we can focus on? We've got 15 minutes. I don't want to belabor it. If we feel like we played this out to however far we're going to get, we can break early and people can grab lunch. But we do have 15 minutes left if there is discussion that needs to be continued.
Yeah, I might frame one of these questions in getting towards the statement that you made about the top 3 things to go back and take to Gerst from your perspective, would be what would you say would be the top opportunities in the near-term window to enable and to partner with the commercial sector and the public in general on this initiative to better position it for success in both areas? So what are the opportunities? Thinking maybe about the nearer term stuff, because that's the stuff that we need to get moving on, right? But what might be those nearer term opportunities and tactics?
This will be more self-serving than it intended to be, but I think it's around identify, because it's the most tangible set of technologies we have today, whether they're ground-based or space-based, visible or IR. Those are things that a broad community of people understand very well, how to make sense of that data and do something with it. And it goes beyond just the professionals. I think this is where you can get into crowdsourcing. You can mobilize semi-pros and true amateurs to do some portions of the mission, right? There's a lot that we don't know about asteroids in general, not just where they are, but even ones we know where they are, we don't know a lot about them. So there's a lot of work that could be done there in a very quick turnaround where you could reach out and start mobilizing a lot of excess capacity to get back to engagement. I think you want to know if you engage somebody, it's how do they use their excess capital, whether it's their time, their resources, their mind. I think that can be done in a hurry.
And I completely agree with Clinton that Identify is a good early opportunity, but I think so that we don't lose sight of the next step, in parallel, we really need to start focusing on the technologies that do need to be developed so that there's an understanding out there of what we should be working on, and we can articulate what it is that we need to be partnering on, what steps we need to take, so that once we are even in a better position than we've already gotten to from an Identify standpoint, we know how we can actually get out there and interact with an asteroid.
I got the impression that Sunjammer, and I know that B612, these are two semi-commercial or certainly fundraising endeavors that enlist the public by offering some participation. I know you can give money to these projects and in some way have your name associated with the project. If to somehow attach the NASA meatball to that notion of public participation seems like something that could be explored.
I'll go one more. I'm looking at the pictures behind your head thinking somebody at NASA probably cooked those up. Maybe you have an image contest and ask someone else what they think Identify looks like. Does it look like a $30 million facility with a 3-meter optic? Does it look like, you know, an ISS EVA suit for Explorer? Even conceptually, right, that sort of sets a tone. Do you go in somewhere else and get someone to set the tone of the idea behind all of these things and see if that sparks a different direction in terms of doing some of the work?
Great.
Basically, it's the bottom line is get on with it. Operating at government salary pace and aerospace salary pace, especially for entrepreneurial companies like ours, you guys are going to have some sort of industry day next spring. That's 1,000,000 years away for us. Okay, we're burning investor money now, and as is the other company. So do things now. They don't have to be the major things, but things that begin to break the catch-22 of can we work with these people? Are they real? How do we prove it? And start doing those things. On the crowdsourcing side of things, go and the broader public involvement, get started now with something. Don't wait for the perfect plan, the mega giga plan that somehow fits into your 2015 roadmap activities or something like that. Start now with something that is, as they say on the internet, a minimum viable product, and gets you rolling and indicates that this is real and not a kabuki dance or a road show, which I don't think you guys are engaged in. But the proof is always going to be in the action starting, both on the public side and the company side like ours.
Great. Anything else burning? Please.
I'm actually carrying the microphone, but I wanted just to make a comment about some of the discussions that's been made on crowdsourcing. There's been some discussion about maybe the informed public that can contribute because they've got the resources or are in groups where they're being able to contribute, and maybe the other spectrum of the general public that might just be informed. In this area of crowdsourcing or being able to actually provide some sort of funding towards a project or towards an idea, even if it's not fully developed yet, allows people to really feel like, from a public standpoint, that they have ownership. I really liked the idea of the mind files that go up because people feel part of the mission.
Be prepared for, expect, and grow from failures along the road. Not all partnerships are going to work. Not all crowdsourcing is going to get there. I looked at one a few weeks back that was a lunar mission that raised $17,000. Well, man, if they can do it, I need several of those things. But it's really important, you know, when a private guy a gal puts her money at risk and succeeds, she gets wealthy. When she fails, it's tough times. When a government gal puts the agency at risk, which is how any of these partnerships are viewed, they're viewed, oh my God, what can go wrong? What will Congress say when this thing fails? And when the agency succeeds, often as not, people go, well, you didn't need that much money, we're going to cut your budget. But the person gets a plaque on the wall or something. It doesn't get personally rich, but when the agency fails, there's a whole city called Washington that I lived in for 20 years that just jumps all over it. And look at this Cylindra example in space kind of thing. So I think that going into partnerships where you invite goofballs like Rick and me to participate, you got to qualify us. There's no question about that. You can't just enter into a partnership with everybody, but you have to not expect to bat 1,000 along the way, and you have to structure them so that people don't get harmed when that happens, but it can't send the agency back to, okay, now we're back to Apollo the way it should be, because that ain't going to happen anymore. So be aware that not all of these great crowdsourced missions will ever fly. Not every partnership that NASA enters into will succeed, but you don't need it. You know, part of it, when it's much lower cost and much more diversity of organizations trying to get there, they don't all have to succeed. You have to have a good batting average, and you can't waste money. But at the same time, some of the best things I've ever built and done have come because I really goofed up previously, and oh, I can't do that anymore, I have to change. So that's a difficult culture at NASA to embrace. I applaud, I've seen night and day strides, and I've been doing, you know, Jason knows I bought a Minuteman missile from NASA in 1982. You know, I'm still the first and only U.S. citizen ever to buy a Minuteman missile. That was a really unique partnership that Neil Hosenball, who was the general counsel, figured out, well, I can't really sell you a Minuteman, Charlie, but I can sell you the rights to use it, and if you don't bring it back in the same condition that you borrowed it from, you have to pay full acquisition value. So that there are innovative, there have always been innovative people. What I see now is more of an innovative culture, and that's because the finger's out of the dike, the gene, you know, pick whatever silly analogy you want. There's just too much commercial stuff going on to ever bottle it back up and go back to the days of Apollo. That's not a viable model, but the new model is not going to be pure, you know, light at the end of the tunnel. There are going to be some hiccups along the way, and you should use those as learning events, and not seek out to fail, but not punish failure by saying, well, that model doesn't work, we're never going to do that again.
Yeah, great. Any other thoughts? Good thought. All right, folks. I think this has proven to be a really, really successful session this morning. We had 55 respondents provide ideas that got down selected to those that were presented here today. Huge thanks to those that, all of you that took time to put in a proposal. And for those that were selected to take the time to then prepare a presentation and come share with us. And then all of you that joined us to participate in this conversation. I really do believe that it is the first of many steps forward, and I feel like we have a lot of good material to pull in to the findings that we'll share in the plenary, and really appreciate all your time and energy to get us to where we are at this point. So with that, let us close maybe 3 minutes early, and this does not end the conversation. There's hallways and internet and relationships that I hope we've started that will continue this as we move forward. So with that, I thank everybody, and we will adjourn our session.
And please remember to attend the crowdsourcing and citizen science session this afternoon. You can see us again, but in flipped roles. And on Friday morning, you can see us again flipped, for next generation engagement. And in those two panels, we'll really be talking about meaningfully engaging individuals in the work of the grand challenge element of the initiative. So we please encourage you to come to those and be part of those discussions, especially since, has been stated by some of the folks in the audience, that's where we're going to be likely doing a lot of the initial work right out the gate to get started on this activity. So we would really love your feedback since those things are quicker in the hopper. So thank you very much.
Thank you.